before.
So, hi, I'm Ruth Bruner, and I'm here with Ben Wacker in the Surge hat, and he was a vet and a large animal dairy vet in Windsor, and also Jim Fisher. And we are at 3rd and Main Street at the Peculiar Ale Old Mill Brewery, and we're here to find out the story of TIHO from the dairy farmer and the vet. So go ahead and introduce yourselves, tell us your name, any other interesting tidbits before I start asking you questions.
You can start.
I'm 86 years old, and I've been retired from veterinary medicine since 1980. We live in Severance, which is just up the road a little ways from here.
Okay. And
I'm Jim Fisher. I'm 72. Grew up north of Timnath on the dairy farm. The dairy farm was TIHO Holsteins, and that's the building behind us.
okay, so how did this building end up here in Windsor at the mill? At the elevator, I guess it was.
I had bought the dairy from my father, and this was part of what I bought, and we no longer used it. It was made for high moisture corn, which means it had to be airtight. It lost its seal. I couldn't use it for that. It sat there empty. The people that owned the elevator at that time in Windsor were looking for more storage. They wanted to buy it. So instead of buying it, we did an old farmer deal and we traded. I've got 2 semi-loads of cotton, whole cotton seed, and they were given the bin and their responsibility of taking it down and moving it.
Wow, so cottonseed for feeding your animals?
Yep, to feed the cattle. We had fed a total mixed ration, and part of that total ration was whole cottonseed.
Okay. So Ben, as the dairy vet, what did you do with TIHO and the why was he so famous, or the whole breed of it?
Well, I was the veterinarian for Fisher Dairy, and I also owned a dairy, and I was in need of a herd sire, and since Fisher Dairy had purebred cattle and was well known, I was looking for a bull, and this particular bull caught my eye. I knew nothing about genetics or any of the background. I just liked him. So that's how I came to buy him.
Oh, so you bought the bull?
I bought the bull, but they had reserved half interest in the semen in case this bull ever went to a bull stud. And so I owned the bull physically, but they owned half interest in the semen.
So TIHO, was that just this bull's name, or was it a branding or a...
In the registered Holstein business, you had to have a prefix, which was the first name that you used in the name of any animal when you registered it. It had to be approved by the Holstein Association. So Dad sent in 3 or 4 names that he wanted to use. The one they accepted was TIHO, which stood for Timnath Holsteins. So every registered animal that came off of that farm, first name in its registration papers was TIHO.
So what was the second name of the stud?
TIHO Elevation.
TIHO Elevation. Okay, and what was his record, or what made him so famous?
He produced good offspring that gave more milk than their mothers. And so he had a high enough proof at that time that showed he was able to repeat that he was purchased, and they sold semen all over the country.
Wow.
The semen royalties were very similar to the oil royalties. People have sold their land, but they kept the royalties for the oil. The same with Dr. Wacker bought the bull, but Dad retained part of the semen rights on him.
Okay. So what do you remember about TIHO Elevation, Ben?
Well, he was a real good-looking bull, and his physical characteristics were very good. He was a little bit ornery at times. When I first got him and put him, we didn't have a really good bull stud, a bull pen for him. So we had him in a place, and we had some 2x10 planks, and he was breaking them. And so I thought, well, this can't be. He's too dangerous here. So I loaded him up, took him to the sale, and on the way to the sale, I kept thinking, should I tell Dwayne and Jim? Well, okay, they've got interest in the semen, but it's not going to amount to. I went ahead, but I unloaded him at the auction in Fort Collins. Went home, started home, and it seemed like just my pickup turned south. And so I ended up at their place, and they were out in the yard, both Dwayne and Jim, and I told them what I had done, and Dwayne looked at Jim, and he says, well, where can we put him? And anyway, Dwayne says, well, I'm going right up there and get that bull back. And I says, well, if you think that much of him, I'm going to go build a regular bullpen for him. And so, thanks to them, he was saved.
He was saved. What year was that, approximately?
Pardon?
What year was that, would you say, that you...
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But he lived how long? I mean, do you remember his span of...
Well, he was at our place until he was proven, and Jim was in charge of the negotiating with all of the bull studs, and until the bull stud called for him, and then he went back to it was to Midwest at that time.
Okay. So how about you two? I mean, what was your relationship like as a vet and a dairyman? And Dwayne was your father. How many years back? Give us kind of a timeline of that.
I kind of tried to recreate that. I really can't. I don't know when you started working with us.
I don't remember. I have a hard time what I got for breakfast. I don't remember.
So when did the Fisher Dairy start? Was
1947.
that 1947, and it was by your father, Dwayne?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And what's the story behind that?
Well, he grew up on the farm there on the county line. Dad was
Weldon Larimer County
yeah.
line.
Dad was the younger of two brothers, so older brother got to stay at the farm. Dad to go out on his own, which proved to be good because Dad always kind of went out on his own. He decided, well, they milked Guernseys at that time. Dad didn't want to milk Guernseys because they didn't give enough milk. So he kind of broke family tradition and started milking Holsteins.
Okay.
Dad was one of those early adapters. He always was one of those guys, one of the first guys that did things. And so he decided to just moved off to his own farm, and my grandfather, I know, helped him get the first one bought. And they just built a dairy from 4 cows to where it was. He bred a herd of cows that was world known, and all over the world. In fact, we had a interesting about the TIHO, we had a group of Japanese dairymen visit the dairy in the early 70s, and they saw the name TIHO, and they all came in, they started talking real fast, and we asked the translator what was the big excitement, and the guy said, well, TIHO is the most famous sumo wrestler in Japan right now.
So, wow, that's a great story. So
Yeah.
then, how did you end up in the business then with your father?
I
how
was the
it?
oldest son.
Oh, okay. So,
My brother, the second he graduated from high school, went to Alaska. I stayed on the dairy.
okay. So how did you see changes in dairy farming and breeding over the years of your lifespan? I mean, Ben, you were probably born in what, in the
I'm
50s?
sorry, I didn't.
How did you see the changes in dairy production, milk, breeding, milking?
Well, when I grew up in Berthoud, Colorado, and we had a small dairy. We milked them by hand, and at first there. I remember we had always had cats in the barn, and we hobbled the cows, which was a deal. We'd hook it onto their hocks and keep them from kicking us. And so the cats, we always squirted milk at them, and they wouldn't drink this milk. Well, one time the cat got up towards the front of this cow, and she moved her foot and stepped on it. Well, the cat instinctively reached around and dug her claws into this cow. She jumped straight up with her back legs, and she came down in the bucket of milk that I had.
Could have been a cartoon. Could have been a cartoon.
So anyway, then later on, we got some milking machines. I believe it was called a Dairy Queen, and it would catch the milk in a bucket, and then we would have to take it. And we had, at that time, we had a cement water tank in the milk house, and we would have 10-gallon milk cans, and we would put the milk, strain it, put it into those cans, and then set the can in the cold water. And then maybe the next day the guy would come by and pick up those milk cans, and it would go to the creamery. Johnstown had a creamery. We made condensed milk. Okay, and then from there, gradually it went to milking parlors and automatic takeoffs, automatic washing of equipment between each cow, and there's been a lot of changes, yeah, since way back when.
So how about for you, Jim?
In 1982, I realized I wasn't a dairyman.
Okay.
I was really good with the purebred part of the business, but decided at that time to disperse the herd of cows, which didn't go over real well with Dad, but he got over it, I got over it, we were okay. The time we had our sale, we had people there from, I think, 29 different states, 4 different countries, had the third highest averaging herd dispersal that year, so we were really well known. But I got out of the dairy industry not knowing what I was going to do when I grow up. I still don't. I stayed in the dairy industry. Everything from working in a veterinarian's store to finally ending up with a dairy equipment company. I worked for them for 30 years.
So,
And now at 72, I'm still working 10 days a month with a German equipment company on a retainer basis. So I've stayed in the dairy business my whole life.
yeah.
So I've seen it go from where Ben started to now, if you've got less than 1,000 cows, you're a small dairyman.
Yes.
It's just monumental, the changes. So it's been quite a change.
So what was your dad like?
Bullheaded,
Bullheaded?
caring. He really cared for people. I don't know how many times he rescued kids' 4-H dairy projects. He just stuck his neck out for anybody that liked cows. There was a family in Timnath, their name was Burke, and they had a daughter named was Joan. She had a really good cow, but she stifled herself, which she couldn't walk right. And so here she had this big stifled heifer. Dad went down, gave her full price for it, took it home, milked her for a little while, and then finally beefed her. But he just did little things like that for people all the time. He was a very giving person when it came to that kind of stuff. He and I were both bullheaded. We argued all the time. We didn't get along really well. And he's got smarter all the time. The longer he's been gone, the smarter he's got.
The more you realize
Yeah,
what he was
he
saying
really-
was
And you don't find out what he did until you can go back and look in perspective. At the time, it didn't seem right, but now you look at the perspective and you know what it was. Yeah, you just did things like that.
what stood out to you from that time after his death that you realized and appreciated about Dwayne Fisher.
Just how much he really, he had an innate business sense that didn't make sense to any accountants, but he understood things and he always made sure that things were done right. In fact, this morning, I discovered a piece of paper. My dad ended up turning wood and selling bowls and vases all over Colorado when he had retired. And I found, and he consigned them to these stores. Well, I found a piece of paper this morning that was made out. It said, "This is to notify you that if I become incapacitated, all checks are to be made out to Elsie Fisher," which was my mother. He just did little things like that all the time. He covered his butt. Did a good job.
Good businessman. Good
Yeah.
businessman. So,
And he was fair. He was always fair.
always. So how did you get the TIHO Elevation Stud round? Tell me, I really don't understand all that. How did that work? Did you take the bull with just the semen and inseminate it? Or
The bull goes to the bull
the
the
stud.
bull? Because
Yeah.
now they fly.
Yeah, but the bull still goes to a bull stud where all the semen is collected.
Okay.
Yeah, it has to go to a stud that collects it and distributes the semen.
Okay. So where did that happen at?
And Midwest Livestock was in Viroqua, Wisconsin. Midwest Bull Stud was in Viroqua, Wisconsin.
Wow. So, what do you think about Peculiar Ale naming a milk stout beer after TIHO?
I think it's okay. Be fine. I'll come try it.
It's got to get a little colder, so be ready for a milk stout.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. So, what changes have you seen, Ben, in Windsor? Because you moved here in the '60s as a vet.
We moved here we moved here in February of '63.
February '63.
Yes. It was a town of about 1,500. Now it's 30,000. This was a garden spot. I would think of farming, agriculture. It was just a really nice small town that I would leave my vet truck with all the drugs and everything in it parked out here on the side of the road. Never worried, never locked nothing. Now, it's not that way.
Was your office here on 3rd and Walnut across
It
from
was.
Town Hall and Park School?
Yeah, it was 216 3rd Street.
3rd
just
Street, right behind
across the
here.
alley here was, we have the house on the corner, and it used to be the printing shop. Roy Ray, who had the Windsor Beacon, built the shop, and he printed it there, and where am I going with this?
Well, that became your vet office, didn't it?
That became my vet office, yes.
And that was knocked down in the tornado, or when? Because there's a bigger metal shed there now.
Well, we, after I retired in 1980, and then we had rented out the vet building to a fella that did upholstery. And we had rented the house to some people, and the fella that had the upholstery shop in there, he was a little short on cash. For probably close to a year, all of that time I got one check from the guy, and it bounced. And so I decided I was not a very good landlord. I was too, no, yeah, that's okay. You can't pay it now. Mañana, good enough. See, so
you weren't Dwayne as a businessman, right?
Later on, we sold the house and the lot to my daughter and son-in-law, and they tore it down and built the shop that's there now.
Okay. So, Mr. Fisher, you say you're quite a storyteller. And what kinds of questions should I ask you to get some of these good stories going?
Well, I can go back a lot further in Windsor's history.
Oh, good. Let's hear that.
Because my grandfather lived on the Oklahoma district. My mom was born down there, and they were the Swedes. And they actually called Windsor Little Moscow.
Because they were Swedish?
And when they'd come to town, they'd get beat up quite often. There'd be a lot of fights. And he tells us one time they came down in a load of hay, and all the Swedes and all the Jansons and all the Norwegians were hiding in that load of hay. They had a big brouhaha right on the main street. And so it was just one of those things where, here you are. They were the outsiders, they came in, but but he just loved to come to Windsor, and pretty soon it became his favorite place. And he was really conversational, my grandfather Elmer, and he would come to town, and my mom remembered sitting in the car while Grandpa, on Saturday nights, they all came to town to grocery shop and to visit. Mm-hmm. And my granddad loved to visit. My mom said she sat in the car with her brothers and her mom, sometimes for hours, while Elmer talked to everybody in Windsor. So it's always been a real close-knit community. I remember driving through the middle of town here, and even the house down here, there was two houses down here that had no lawns, but it was always gravel. And the gravel never had a weed in it. It was always well tended. The sidewalks were swept. It was just a neat, well taken care of town.
Yeah.
So it's been part of the heritage forever.
Forever. So your mom went to Oklahoma school. What was that like?
Well,
on County Road 13 or 15, or where was it?
I don't know. She was in that
15.
school district,
yeah.
But she went to Timnath.
She went to Timnath.
She went to Timnath.
Okay.
And that's where she and Dad met, was in Timnath.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, well, is there any other facts or tidbits we need to know before we
think that pretty well sums it up.
Yeah, so I'm so happy that we're here today and see the TIHO story with the history of our residents and experts. So thank you, and